Greetings, everyone, whichever the time zone you're currently in. My name is Aleksandar Bošković, and I am co-director of East Central European Center here at the Harriman Institute. And I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar, in which we host the writer and journalist Slavenka Drakulic, who will present her new book, Café Europa Revisited, How to Survive Post-Communism, mostly in conversation with the organizer of this event, who will I will introduce very soon. But before I introduce our today's speakers and today's event, let me say a few things about the few upcoming events which the East Central European Center will host in April. On April 13, we will have a lecture by Tamas Stark on the first deportation of Hungarian Jews in the Second World War. And this event will be moderated by my colleague and East Central European Center's co-director, Christopher Case. On April 18th, we will have a lecture by Gabor Dobo on how did left-wing print culture experiment with capitalism, moderated by myself and my colleague, Christopher Case. On April 19th, we will have a lecture by writer Laura Limani from Kosovo on reframing Yugoslavia through personal histories. This event will be moderated by Professor Elidor Miheli from Hunter's College. And today's event is the part of the collective memory and democratic backsliding in Central and Eastern Europe series, organized by the Harriman Institute postdoctoral fellow Čarna Pištan, who will I introduce, and I will later turn the floor to her to introduce our today's speaker, writer Slavenka Drakulic. So Čarna Pištan is a Mary Skladovska-Curie postdoctoral fellow at the Harriman Institute. She was previously an adjunct professor at the University of Udine, and a postdoctoral research fellow in comparative public law at the University of Udine and University of Bologna in Italy. Her research focuses on the emerging field of law and memory, and she's currently working on the project that is titled Illusions of Eternity, the Constitution as the Place of Memory, or Lieu de Mémoire, and the problem of collective remembrance in the Western Balkans. Her project explores this complex relationship between collective memory on one side and the national identity on the other by introducing a very interesting and novel perspective, namely the study of the constitutions as places of memory. And Čarna's research is genuinely interdisciplinary, as it bridges legal studies, nationalism studies, and memory studies. And as a part of her research activities, she organized this collective memory and democratic backsliding in Central and Eastern Europe series. And today's book talk with Slavenka Drakulic, the author of Café Europa Revisited, is actually organized as a part of this series. And before I turn floor to Čarna Pištan, I will just mention that all of you who are following us today, you can ask questions, post your questions on Q&A on Zoom function. And also, if you are following us on YouTube, you can use live chat on YouTube. So without further ado, I will turn the floor to Čarna Pištan, who will introduce our today's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bošković, for this introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. It is really a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Slavenka Drakulic, who is a Croatian-born journalist and writer, and whose books have been translated into many languages. In particular, in the United States, she has published 8 non-fiction books and 5 novels. So in her books, Slavenka focuses on a variety of topics, including the political and ideological situation in post-communist countries, nationalism, and feminist issues. She has also written about the tragedies of the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, such as ethnic cleansing and mass rapes. In the United States, her best-known book is How We Survived Communism and Even Laughed. And this is a collection of essays in which she deals with everyday life under communism. And two other books she has written deal with similar topics: Balkan Express and Café Europa, Life After Communism. So both focuses on everyday life in communist and post-communist countries. So Slavenka has also written about war criminals in the former Yugoslavia. In the book, They Would Never Hurt a Fly, War Criminals on Trial in The Hague. And she's also a contributing editor in The Nation and a freelance author whose essays had appeared in the New Republic, the New York Times Magazine, and the New York Review of Books, as well as in Süddeutsche Zeitung, Internationale, The Guardian, and other newspapers and magazines. So her last collection of essays, on which we'll focus today, and Professor Bošković already mentioned it, is Café Europa Revisited, How to Survive Post-Communism. So is this book. So it has been published in 2021, and the book paints a picture of Eastern Europe 30 years after the end of communism. So Slavenka, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for being here with us today. I think that maybe a good starting point would be to explain, first of all, what was the motivation for this book. So why you decided to write this book, let's say more than 30 years after the fall of communism.
Good day, that is good evening, because I'm in Vienna, Austria, in Europe. To everyone who is watching and listening, and please let me thank the organizers who were so kind to invite me to present my new book. And thank you very much. And from what I hear and I see, you are doing a lot of interesting things that I'm also thinking and writing about. Now to your question, Čarna, motivation, I think, is never one. There are always many things mixed. As I am from this part of the world, as I am from so-called Balkans, from former Yugoslavia, born in former Yugoslavia and living in today Croatia, because as you know, when Balkans fell apart, when Yugoslavia fell apart in a rather bloody war, there were new countries popping up. One of them is Croatia. But before all of that, what happened is one year which was for all of us, especially in Eastern Europe, very important. And that is 1981, symbolically called Velvet Revolution. Also the symbol of which is a collapse of the Berlin Wall. That is actually collapse of communism, which we in Eastern Europe call socialism. But as it is used in the West, and I was writing books in English and for English and German and foreign publishers, I'm using the word communism for that as well. It is a kind of trilogy. The first book that I wrote on that subject is How We Survived Communism and Even Laughed. I felt the need after 1989 to travel throughout Eastern Europe, to the countries that I visited before, to see if there is any change, to see what changes I could observe, and to somehow, in some cases, even I could say, revisit my own past, because the situation in Yugoslavia, which was not in Eastern Bloc, was not part of the socialist bloc, was a little bit different. We lived a little bit better, we could travel, we could, generally we felt that we are a little bit different. And I would dare say today, a little bit better than the rest of the countries of our neighbors. So my first impulse, my first motivation was to go there, to sit, mostly it was sitting in the kitchen with women, and they were telling me the stories. And then also, of course, there were all kinds of events that I attended, places that I visited, and there were, you could say this was a kind of a political reportage, but you would be wrong. It was a view from below, what I call frog's view. So I went to see from the level of everyday living. I was very interested in visiting, for example, shops. What can you find in ordinary shop? And I remember in Sofia, a shop that I have the vivid memory of today, a shop in Sofia near the where my friend lived, where I lived with her. Of course, I visited friends in all of these countries. I didn't have money to stay in some fancy hotels, and there were not very many fancy hotels, notably. So what I did is I went in the morning and joined the queue for milk, because milk was coming at a certain hour. And then when it was my turn, I didn't wait long, maybe 15 minutes to that shop. But how the shops look at that time, Čarna, you maybe can ask your mother or grandmother, because you certainly don't remember that. But there were very few things. And I remember my astonishment that potatoes were kept on the floor, just potatoes, sacks of potatoes on the floor, standing there. There was a lot of kiseli krastavci. There were a lot of pickles on the shelves, but there was very little of other things, you know. So detergent, it was a problem. But I'm speaking about 1990. This is not early socialism. Very few things were there. So I was interested in that kind of pictures, images, and also the traces of new, what was coming new, what was, for example, I noticed that many cafes and that were opening all over the place, not only in Sofia, but also in other places, had foreign names, had them what were considered, I don't know, English, or there were very many Cafés Europa, or some joint would be called Hollywood, or some joint would be called another joint would be called Paris. And of course, it didn't have anything with that place, but only symbolic. I think it was showing a symbolic belonging to the new world, to something that we were always part of that world, but somehow we ended up on the wrong side. After many years, I always liked that perspective, and as a journalist, I also write from that perspective. Then I wrote Café Europa. This is the British edition. I don't know if you see it. It was the year was 1996, and Café Europa was a continuation. I saw it as a continuation of How We Survive Communism and Even Laugh. And it seemed to me, it would be interesting to go again to see what has changed and how much has changed. I went there and I have seen that some things have changed, but some things have not changed at all. And my impression, which I later on then wanted to prove or disapprove, was that things are changing very, very slowly. That our expectance was wrong. We thought we are going to change the places around us, people around us, houses around us, maybe even nature around us will be different after we wake up in 1990, but it wasn't really so. And so I tried to observe, if I would formulate it like that, How We Survive Communism was focused more on the old world, on communism, and Café Europa was more focused on little changes that happened in the meantime. Then this is many, many years ago, of course, but I always wrote in the meantime reportages and problems, whatever, as a journalist about these topics, so-called European changes topics. And then it was 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Berlin Wall approaching. And so my publisher liked the idea that something has to be published for the 30th anniversary, because when you think about in your life, 30 years is very much. In history, as probably 30 years is not so very much. So how much changes have happened on the individual level? The whole new generation grew up from 1989. And this generation has also their own kids now that are pretty much grown up, I would say. And so to to make a long story short, I traveled to almost the same places in Eastern Europe and tried to capture more really focus on the what has by now changed. And these are several topics that I touch in this book, which are important. And this is attitude to history. And the other is democracy. What happened with democracy? Yes or no? I mean, what really do we have? Do we have democracy? Do we have, or what do we have actually? And another one was about, I think, the crisis of identity that we had, that we have or had in Eastern Europe, some of Eastern European countries more and some less, which came up and was provoked somehow by this big influx of refugees in 2015. That somehow provoked especially Eastern Europeans. Think of Hungary, for example, think of razor blade fence on the border that Orban built there. So that was my, I think, my interest. And then one thing which goes through all of this somehow, and it's maybe to some people not to be understood, but it's corruption, because I think that the cancer of these societies, post-communist societies in Eastern Europe, is corruption. So, but corruption, it's not something that does not exist in the West. Of course it does. My husband is Swedish, and we share our life between Sweden and Croatia. So, of course, there is also in Sweden corruption. Recently, there was several big cases in France of very high officials being tried for corruption. But the difference is one. The difference is that in Eastern Europe, it became systematic. It is absolutely not possible to do or to achieve or anything. We could say we have explanation for that, or at least I have it. And the root is in the party membership, in the Communist Party membership. This was the climbing ladder. But today it is overpowering, it's omnipresent, and it's not possible to do anything without it. So these couple of points, from corruption to democracy, from history to identity crisis, I tried to touch upon through various stories that I tried. There are some of them anecdotal. That it's certainly not an academic piece of work, but more of a, let's say, political reportage. And to complete this, however, the book was almost a year late, the 30th anniversary, which I wasn't happy about, but there were other circumstances that decided when the book was to be published. But it basically is meant to somehow close the circle. Now, watching what's happening and how is European Union today and what is Eastern European countries, what are they doing? I really don't know if this is closing the circle. So maybe the circle is still open.
So yes, thank you very much. So also the book really deals with different topics, but also so as you mentioned, with different countries from Central and Eastern Europe. But when I was reading the book, I had this impression that let's say a common topic is always the issue of history and memory. And which in Central and Eastern Europe is very, let's say, problematic since the fall of communism. So why, in your opinion, these countries of Central and Eastern Europe remember the past in this, let's say, troubling way?
Well, if I would have to put it very shortly, they would try not to remember the past. They would try to erase the past. I could start with my own country, and I will very gladly. But I would first mention one visit to Prague. I visited Prague very early after the collapse of the wall there. They still didn't manage to paint the city. I mean, it was still pretty much run down. And then I learned about, there I visited Museum of Communism, I have to say, which is a unique place in Prague. But also I have learned about opinion poll in gymnasium. They made the opinion poll in gymnasiums a couple of years after the collapse of communism. And how old are they? 17, 18 years old students. The results of that was how much do you know about communism? And the result was devastating because they knew almost nothing. Their knowledge of history was very, very, what should I say, bad. Why? I talked to the people there and they said, it is mostly because people at home don't learn it at school, but at home people also don't talk about that because they want to forget. I heard the same answer in Ukraine when I was there. I know this answer from other countries. So why to remember, why to go to this past, which was so troublesome in the sense of poverty, in the sense of totalitarian government? Why should we remember that? This is not going to repeat. We are now living in a free world. Indeed, I think it is one of these things of a big illusions, which I am trying somehow to show, that of the West in this sense, that I was writing recently an article, no, it was another conversation with the chief editor who is about your age of Information. This is a daily paper in Denmark. And so we were talking about the book also, and he said, well, you know, as a Westerner, I thought these people in 1989, they got freedom, they got human rights, they got democracy, they got capitalism. That is, they're the same with us. They have the same thing as we do. So I didn't bother very much. I didn't follow it up. I didn't care about this in Europe any longer. So basically, Westerners would care about when something happens, when something problematic happens, as it did in, for example, in wars in Yugoslavia, or now is such a situation. But if the idea was, general idea was, we are helping them to bridge, to make this passage, it's called transition. We are going to help them. But yes, they now have all the conditions to develop, and they need some help, but they should stand on their own hands. Here we have what I think, and it's perhaps at my picture, how I see it, the first phase of before 1989, the first idea about the West, about Europe, was idealization. We thought, oh my God, once something happens, this is like an old aunt who is very rich and lives in Vienna, and she will give us all this richness, and we will live like, you know, drink Coca-Cola and eat chocolate and God knows what. I mean, the main idea of this idealization was not freedom, I'm afraid, but it was really consumerism. And when this consumerism came, this was, I think, the most fascinating change that had happened. The first supermarket that opened in Bucharest, I was there when it opened. It was a private little supermarket. And it was such a fascination. And people came inside only to see how it looks when there is a full of things and you can take them. It was a self-service. You can take them in your hands and put them in this basket and go. I mean, I know it sounds very funny, but from today's perspective, even also to Romanians themselves. But the thing is that it was fascinating to see opening of the first self-service supermarket in Bucharest. But this is how we imagine Europe. The next step came, and it was imitation. The West told us, now if you do what we tell you, And if you use the money we give you the way you do, and if you let our companies sell you and build there and all of the rest, you will become like us. Well, that really didn't happen and cannot happen so quickly. And the reason is our history. This is where it comes. Our history that was very, very different. And the fact that history can perhaps change, there are political events, change of the system, change of economic system, but it is what I call mentality of people, their habits, their attitudes, their daily life, their many, many things that constitute mentality, and their past also. It's completely, it changes very, very slowly. In that respect, we do not change. And of course, there is a difference from generation to generation. And then comes some kind of disappointment and even rebellion, which we can perhaps later on address, but we have no time for that. The problem, this is the problem with past in many countries, including mine, is that we want to jump over our shadow, forget communism. And some countries have also a problem of being a fascist state during the Second World War, like Croatia, for example, or Slovakia, for that matter. That countries have an additional problem, that because they would like to somehow jump over that too. So Croatia has a special problem, which became even more of a problem during this recent war. In one of these wars in Yugoslavia was in Croatia. And so this popped up as a really big deal, because how do you deal with it? How can you, the only time in history, like in Slovakia, when your country was independent, in quote, because it was a puppet state, German puppet state, it was a fascist state. So the father of the nation, as they called him in Croatia, Franjo Tuđman, the first president, tried somehow to bridge it, but didn't really succeed. And those forces in the society, backed by the church, also became more and more visible, more and more radical, and more influential. And the third thing that plays role, I know my answers are very long, stop me if you want, but the third important thing is that history in all former socialist communist countries was controlled by the party. It was a party history that is official history. And this is what we learn in school, but what we learn at home was a collective memory and individual memory. And what it created a gap. Basically, now we come to the point that is most interesting for you, is if you are studying this kind of thing, it's a gap between official history and memory, be it collective or individual memory. It never somehow came together. It never met, and it's not meeting yet. And it is indeed a big problem, because I would like to quote an American who is American historian whom I also quote in my book, Timothy Snyder, who says in one interview, history is impossible without memory, but memory without history is dangerous. And I think this basically tells you all even about today's situation.
Yeah, sure. So only to confirm that, yes, this is also my topic, but I'm looking at it more from a legal perspective. So because in my project, I'm looking how memory, not how history or official histories, but how memory has been elevated to the constitutional level, and then the impact of this on the society. So because basically, in my opinion, so if memory is constitutionalized, it will have a specific impact then on a society. So, so this is let's say how I see it. So this is also why your answer was very interesting to me. In your book, there is one essay which is dedicated to Ukraine. Can we say that this problem of memory and history, or historical memory, has now exploded in the war in Ukraine, and more generally, how people in Europe see the war in Ukraine?
I would start by saying that people in Europe didn't know anything about Ukraine, and they saw physically, I mean, with their own eyes, Ukraine as one character, one historian is saying in my book only on when they would see a chart or weather report. So it's unknown territory for Europeans, as is Belarusia, or not to mention Moldova. It's a territory that's vast, that's big. We don't know very much about it. I think Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder tell you a lot about this history. And there is no wonder that this is also a country that has a problem with its history, relation to Russia, relation to fascism, and so on. It's a very complicated issue. I would also say that in this, Europeans are always surprised. They were surprised in 2004, first of all, with Orange Revolution. There is some revolution happening there. There is some democracy there. Interesting. Then they were very much surprised in 2014, as you know, when Crimea was occupied by Russians. And what did they do except being surprised? Not really very much. Then what is now happening is that, first of all, nobody, I think, in the wildest dream did not think that Russia will really occupy. Yes, as a threat. Yes, maybe going back down to Crimea, Donbass, but not really full force attack. So this surprise is one feeling, and then fear, of course. And fear, what they are saying over here, and I'm sure also you heard it in the United States, is that Ukrainian war managed to consolidate both NATO and European Union. I mean, it's something that looks on the edge of collapse, both organizations and institutions. But European Union came together in this dire straits situation, and NATO did as well. We are at the moment, I think, living under real fear of the atomic bomb. I mean, people here they speak like that. They say, "Do you think there is going to be a bombardment?" I mean, it's a little bit surreal. And nobody knows. What I think on the other side, what role history plays in this war, I'm not sure. It plays role, I think, on the side of Russia, because obviously what is the aim, or what you can read as an aim of Putin invasion, is imperium. I think his politics is on the level of the. He was disappointed when Soviet Union fell apart, and we have seen it in Georgia and Chechnya, and keeping in power in Belarus, Lukashenko, and so on. And of course, he would like to. It seems to keep this big country also under his wing. So it's not so much. I cannot see him as, I do not get into this discussion. Is he mad? Is he not mad? Is he ill? And is he not ill? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in his politics, regardless of where it comes from. And it seems to be imperial. And what is even more is that there is nobody can review anything or see any direction, or not to mention see the end. So it's rather desperate, to see all these people. It's more about. about 4 million now refugees out of 44 million. So it's a 10% people leaving the country. That in itself is ethnic cleansing. No? And I don't think that ordinary people do very much think about history. And this is what I try to write in this essay about Ukraine, how little, again, they know about it. And it's in a way tragedy that the generation that knows so little about its own history is now have to fight. These are the young people who are fighting, you know, not really knowing what is in the background. They probably know something what they heard that at the table, and what they heard is that Russians and Ukrainians were living together, and many Russians speak Ukrainian, and many more Ukrainians speak Russian. So it's these are the people who are not who were never really the enemies. So it's very, I think it's not so easy psychologically to make this step. To turn a friend into the enemy, because this is what I have witnessed in my own country, former Yugoslavia, where the history is, if I can say so, even more complicated to deal with, and therefore there is a kind of I'm now going back to Yugoslavia. There is now a kind of stalemate that no country can deal even with the war crimes in the Second World War, much less what happened in these wars, 1991, 1995. This is one of the reasons why ICTY was constituted in 1994, I think, or 3 or 4, because we were not actually, as countries, as warring countries, capable of putting on trial our own war criminals. I don't know. You know, there is no country, I think, at war where there are all the soldiers have clean hands and really respecting all the rules of the law. And if the country is not capable of trying their own people who committed war crimes, it's very bad, and therefore ICTY was organized. But I think historically speaking, its aim and its, what should I say, its task was fulfilled in another sense, because of course you can only put on trial symbolic number of war criminals. It was about 200 something. And of course there are many more, but to show that this is not what you do. And also for the future, I think it's important for the future generations to see that there was such a trial, that there were such trials. And on the other hand, the much more important task, and this is what they did fulfill, because all the sides were not happy about how they were treated, be it Serbian side, Bosnian side, Croatian side, everybody's not happy. But to come to truth, you know, the facts that came out on the surface in these trials, which I was following, and then wrote another book, They Would Never Hurt a Fly, about trials in The Hague. These truth, pieces of truth, like a big puzzle, emerged and came up and formed a picture. And this is not these pieces of truth constitute a picture that we ourselves, people who were in the war, on warring side, would not be able to or would be able many years after with a very good will, but perhaps not even then. So I thought it had some meaning to make such a trial and to try these people who were. So when people today ask, is it possible that Putin is going to be investigated for war crimes and put on trial in ICC, because there is International Court in The Hague, International Criminal Court in The Hague? Well, it's possible. It's enough that one country, and in this case it is Ukraine, because Ukraine is member of that court, demands that. On the other hand, neither Russia nor America, nor India, nor China, these big powers, and many other countries are not members of this court, so they will not cooperate. So is it realistic? I don't know. That at the time there was a question I think nobody could imagine that Slobodan Milosevic would end up in The Hague, but he did. So, however, we were talking about much much smaller, that is, more marginal countries, and therefore that war didn't have any attention or very little attention of Europe and the world. But this war, this is also about, don't forget about petrol, about gas, and about, and this is what is making the whole Europe nervous and almost hysterical.
Sure. Okay, so in the meantime, we received several questions from our public. So we have here two questions which are very similar because both are about nostalgia. So the first one asks if you encounter any nostalgia amongst older people. And the second one is, if you say that post-communist societies would like to erase their history, how to explain the nostalgia, for example, in some parts of Eastern Germany, former Yugoslavia, and other society. Similarly, how to explain today's urge of electing political leaders that appear to lean towards autocracy. So, for example, Hungary, Poland, Serbia, etc.
Very good questions, but very complex questions, both of them. So we should separate. Nostalgia is an interesting question, and maybe the person is referring to the big research done in the year 2000, I think 10. I'm not sure, but in Germany, but it was done about nostalgia, and it turned out that there is a lot of nostalgia among people, and that there is a lot of nostalgia among people from former Eastern Germany, Ossis, which would be expected. And also it is a generational issue, or we would assume it is a generational issue. I understand that a person of my age would be nostalgic because first of all, I don't think I exclude really politics out of it. This is not nostalgia for a system as it was, for the life as it was. It's for the poverty that it was, the lack of democracy, nothing of that. We were young, we had a job, and we had something which we in the new circumstances do not have, and that's insecurity. So you have to imagine somebody who is 55 years old, has lost his job, all his earnings, his lives have turned completely different, and he's completely insecure. He, of course, feels nostalgia, but it's not nostalgia for the political system. I'm mentioning this research for a different reason, because, as I said, we assume this nostalgia is understandable among elderly people generation. No, what they discovered in this research is that very many young people from Eastern Germany feel nostalgic. That is a puzzle. So it must be one of these oral history phenomena that people, their parents, are saying, oh, it was good, we had a piece of bread, it was not much to buy, but we could go to Balaton and swim there, or we could go and visit this and that. Yes, we had to wait 10 years for Trabant, but, So it's really oral history. It cannot be anything else. But it was amazing to see that young people also could feel. And I think it's also because of their own insecurity. Because if you are young and if you are exposed to the capitalist market, don't forget that kind of capitalism that we got in Eastern Europe is the most brutal kind of capitalism, and it created an enormous gap between those who have and who have not, and increased the number of those who have very little or don't have anything. So these conditions that capitalism created in Eastern Europe are still not overcome. And I think it also plays part, and this is my psychosocial explanation of that. And then comes this other question. Yeah, can you repeat it for me so I could be more precise? The government, the totalitarian.
Yeah, the authoritarian leaders. So how to explain today's urge of electing these political leaders, which are not democratic, for example, in Hungary, Poland, Serbia, etc. So if we have, on the one hand, nostalgia, so I think that this was the question, nostalgia for the communist past, then why the same societies are electing nationalist and authoritarian leaders?
Oh, because of two reasons. One is, I think, mentality that I mentioned that is not changing very quickly. And the other is the type of the government they are used to. It feels safer in this time of the need. I can't find it here, but but it's in the book. Research made in Eastern Europe, where it's not only Eastern Europe. It was made, I think it's a huge research which measured how much people value representative democracy versus authoritarian governments. And then it's not hard to guess that almost all Eastern European countries came on the top because they value more authoritarian than representative democracy government. And as I said, mentality is hard to change. You have this tradition, regardless that you want to forget it, but you are conditioned by the mentality. And second, there is also fear. This would be, I would say, very, very, very short answer to that. But of course, there is much more to say to that, because my question, how could people appreciate a representative democracy when all what they have seen in their countries is authoritarian or type of the government in spite of formal democracy? Something at the beginning was called, I don't know if this expression is used any longer, and it's called empty form democracy. So formally, it is democracy. It has multi-party system, all the institutions of the democratic country. But in reality, the type of the government, and not only that, but the ways how people behave and ways how from the top down, you can take only Orban for an example, even to see physically how they behave, is autocratic. So it's why would they then trust the democracy? Of course, they trust more autocracy. They're used to it, and nothing yet came from democracy for them. It's not complete answer, but that could be short and long of it.
Yes, we have another question, which is also related to let's say nationalist and authoritarian leaders, but in relation to the elections results of this weekend. So after the election results this weekend in Hungary and Serbia, could you please comment on the perversion of history and memory in the name of illiberal democracy?
It's not perversion, it's propaganda. It's, these two leaders that you mentioned are very good at propaganda. It's, but again, we have to go back to history to remember how history was represented. What was history in these countries? It was not truth. If you think that history is some kind of finally established truth, a truth that everybody agreed about and then you learn it at school, it was not that. And then again comes this, I'm afraid that I'm repeating myself, but this gap between history and memory. And this is problematic. This is an excellent situation, and I have seen it in former Yugoslavia. how you create ideology, how you create the war, if you want, because you have to create a psychological situation in which the other person is not a person, is not a person, is non-person. And for that you need media, and for that you need propaganda. And both of these leaders, Vučić and yeah, his name escapes me now. Hungarian.
Orban.
My God, I write so much about him in the book.
I know, it's in the book.
And then, are excellent in manipulation and in promises. They are populist. They are demagogues of a big kind. And Orban is a fascinating person. Orban is a real politician. He's a big politician. He thinks very big. He's daring. He changed the side as the wind goes. Don't forget that he was a Soros stipendist, that he was for democracy, for open society, for this or that, and then Soros became the biggest enemy. So this is an opportunist of a big kind. He is demagogue of a big kind. He's populist, but he is also a leader, a very strong leader. And strong leaders are, for some reasons, needed not only in these times, but in the time of generally disorientation and insecurity. Once these countries, some of these countries were part of European Union and some other countries want to come to European Union, there are signs of discomfort. There are signs of which I would name. I thought if we were speaking of the first stage of the idealization of Europe, then the imitation, then we came to disappointments, which I already mentioned, that Europe somehow didn't deliver what they promised. I mean, not that we did very much, but we interpret this as not delivering. And then comes this rebellion, but we are not second-class people. You say we are second class. After so many years, 30 years, we are second class. Wait a minute, we are not second class. And the first one who said, no, we are different, we don't want it, we want something else, we are also as worth as you are, is Orban. He is the one who first raised voice, and he formed this Visegrad group, and he became idol of people like Vučić, his big friend, both Vučić, but much more Orban friend was Putin. So he found himself in a very uneasy situation. Both of them are wriggling and somehow would like to please, Vučić would like to please European Union also because he would like to be a part of European Union, and Orban wouldn't like to be deprived of the funds, of the money that European Union is giving him. So it's this very unpleasant situation. But I would not underestimate the power of these people to persuade, and on the other hand, the need of these people, which we have seen in this research, that they incline to go towards the authoritarian society. It's not so easy to people who have 100 years of democracy or 200 years of democracy. They know that they have to rely on themselves. And they have another, I would say, another quality, which is the other side of freedom. They have developed with years, with ages, responsibility. And I have to say, this is something that really, really we lack in Eastern Europe. We do not really understand what is the relationship between freedom and responsibility. Therefore, you have very little reactions, very little actions, very little civil society. it's just that it takes time, it takes understanding, it takes patience. Democracy really takes much more than 30 years.
So we have another question, which is always related to Hungary and Poland. So hello, Slavenka, it's an honor to hear you speak. I suppose that here is written fellow Riječanka here. What are your thoughts about countries like Hungary and Poland that are going backwards with freedom and human rights? So if you would like to add something in relation to freedom and human rights in these two countries.
Yeah, this is also when I will start actually from the word that you mentioned, that this is sliding back. Didn't you say that what you're doing is sliding back in democracy?
Yeah. How collective memory impact.
Yeah, no, the expression sliding back. It's the same thing as going back, making a step back in human rights in Poland and Hungary. It's not stepping back because we were never there. But it is going back in one aspect. Now, when somebody from Rijeka mentioned Poland, it is in human rights of women to have an abortion. But that sliding back from the right to abortion to have the right to abortion only in one case, it started already with the first democratically voted government in 1994 in Poland. Mind you, it's a long way under the strong influence of Catholic Church, of course. The same thing you could say for Croatia. Croatia is also in many things sliding back. It's not sliding back because it was never there, but there is a danger that some human rights are going to be taken away. In Poland, it's much more prominent. In Hungary, it's also much more prominent. But we have to remember we were not really, in many aspects of that, we were not there. So there is no sliding back. You have to have something to be taken from you or to slide back. So this is all what I can. I mean, I could say much more on that subject. But the notion of human rights was not even there, ever, in socialist totalitarian, under socialist totalitarian government and regimes. It's not there. You have to fight to make it real. You have to fight now for that. And what? Women in Poland, I admire them. There were millions and millions coming out protesting the abortion law. It was recently, it was, I don't know, 2 years ago. They were in the streets, everywhere, fantastically organized, and didn't manage to do it. It means it's very, very difficult to realize some of these, to put in action some of these rights. Development of civil society is very much key to that. For example, some people say what is happening in Russia now, it's people are under the threat of 15 years of prison and they come out to protest the war in Ukraine. They are very brave people, but there is not enough of such brave people, because a historian read a very good interview with a historian who says people basically want to be left in peace. They do not want to be active. They do not want to go in the street. They do not want to care, because they think, and this is, I am afraid, thoughts of many, many people throughout former communist world is, we want to be left. We are indifferent, because we have seen in these 30 years that very little and very slowly has changed. So it's not worthwhile fighting for that. But the result of that kind of thinking is, it will not happen if you don't fight for it. It's valid for women and for everything and everybody else. You have to fight every step of it, unfortunately. That it's not given, and nothing will be given by the government, by European Union, by your boss, nothing ever will be given. You have to fight for every right. You have to fight very, very big fight. And it's not in us. It's not in us because we were never even allowed to go in the streets to protest anything banal. The protest was forbidden. So don't tell me that it doesn't influence your mentality if for generations and generations you were not able to go out and protest that in some park the trees were cut. It comes from there.
Sure. Okay, so we have one last question, and then I will also ask to Professor Bošković if he would like to add something. So the last question is, do social networks serve more Democrats or authoritarian leaders?
That's a very difficult question. We don't know. One of these social networks, I think, very, very problematic thing is that they are anonymous. When people are anonymous, then they do all kind of very strange things. And I'm very much afraid of anonymous communication because it's not really communication. But it's obvious that right-wingers are very, very organized. And it is also very well known for the left. Now we can also discuss what is left. Are we talking about social democrats? Are we talking for the radical left? But in general, it's always badly organized. Just let's say just that the left inclining politics is bad in organization. But it's a completely separate discourse because these new elements in politics, which are social networks, of course, and we were talking about propaganda, no? And of course, these leaders are using all propaganda. Why wouldn't they use social networks? Of course, I think they unfortunately worked more, at least in these two cases, for these leaders. Yeah. But generally speaking, it is new world and it's very dangerous and of course full of potentials. But there are many more, much more clever people than me, like Harari, who are, thinking and talking and writing about that. Generally thinking, I think we don't really know what we are dealing with. That's my feeling.
Yeah, okay. So I would like also to ask to Professor Bošković if he would like to add something or a question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Slavenka, and congratulations on a new book to circle your trilogy. And I really liked what you said about the freedom and responsibility, namely how in democracies, Eastern Europe, what is lacking is this responsibility. I'm very much into work by Sreten Ugričić, who wrote in his essays in 2006 how instead of politics of identity, which is prominent or was prominent in the Balkans throughout the 90s and still is, it would be, he says, much more beneficial to have the politics of responsibility and to define identity through not I am this or that ethnicity, but I am what I'm responsible for. And maybe I'll just use this as a departure point to my question regarding the migration. If you can say a few words in regard to responsibility, how Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans, but Eastern Europeans in the first place, are treating migrants coming from North Africa and Middle East throughout 2014, 15, and so on, and how they're treating now migrants coming from Ukraine in regard to this responsibility topic. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's such a huge topic. But let me say first that I completely agree with this, that the policy of identity should be changed with politics of responsibility. This is really the weakest point in our social life and political life, that we are from the top down. We do not know it, we don't want it. And this is why corruption has such a huge influence as a system in our societies. And very short answer to your question, But I can give you a longer answer, but a very short answer is to your question about treating refugees and immigrants from different parts of the world and those from Ukraine now. It's racism. And this is what we in Europe never wanted to admit. We were saying, oh, there are so many and they're not educated and they're not really war immigrants or refugees. They're only migrants. They want to come here to put in jeopardy our way of living, our European culture and our European values, and reducing them all to the common denominator of Muslims, and then in a certain period also terrorists, to the identity of a Muslim terrorist, which everybody is afraid of, to derogate the whole entire millions of people. And it was absolutely horrifying, including, and I would think as a leader, Viktor Orban. And now it became so painfully obvious with the situation from Ukrainian refugees who are real refugees, really, but they're also white. And every European country is welcoming them. Every European country is saying, please come. And they are, when they were fighting before, how many they were, because it was decided, European Union decided that these refugees and immigrants who came in 2015 should be distributed according to quota. Now there is no question of quota. They say, yes, come, please come. I mean, and already giving them all the papers, all the permissions, giving them work, everything. It is so racist that I cannot tell you. But racism could not have been mentioned in Europe 2015, because racism is something very, very bad and something that we Europeans don't do. It's appalling.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I like how you actually, in the chapter that you are talking about migration in Eastern Europe, you call the chapter the United States of Europe, which is the nice title for making this parallel between the racism in the States and Europe more apparent and visible. Well, thank you again. Congratulations, and thank you, Čarna, as well for moderating this event. I wish you good luck, and thanks all of you who followed us on Zoom today.
Thank you all. I have to thank you. It was a great pleasure to be virtually with you there. At least one good side of social media. And Sasha and Čarna, thank you. And well, one day we might meet in real life. But in the meantime, thank you for helping me to say a few things and to make a book visible. It's not so very easy for a writer today with all this electronic media. Thank you. And this is a real book. It's a paper book. And I love this photo of this little girl. The photo itself somehow is so Eastern European, isn't it so?
yeah, it is. I have a copy myself. So
isn't it something so very, the guy who is sitting here and eating, and I mean, there is something Eastern European about it. Thank you all, and bye-bye.
And thank you really very much for accepting our invitation again. And I would like also to thank Professor Bošković for joining the event, and also our public for joining.
Our public especially.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.